Okay, anger. I think fighting is a real important thing to learn, and it's a skill. And it's usually, of course, connected to anger, right? Why else would you fight? And that it's a skill that could be taught. In fact, I'm sort of on this campaign. Let's teach kids how to fight. I mean, I don't mean playground duking it out, but let's have even a course on fighting in relationship in high school. It's like, how many of you took geometry when you were in high school? I mean, took it. I don't mean learned it. Okay. How many of you took fight training? See, no one. And which in the last 10 years did you do or need to do the most? Did you need to geomet or fight? It's real clear. And if you don't know how to fight in relationship, I don't think, you're going to have relationship for very long. There's always these little things that come up. I think Fred talks about the toilet paper roll. You know how the toilet paper roll, it's always supposed to go to the outside, right? That's the right way. And then people in the family keep putting it on the inside, and the phone's ringing, and you've just done your duty, and you're, rushing that thing, and trying to find the end of the roll, and you can't ever find it if you're rolling it the right way when it's put on the wrong way. Of course, I think it's the right way. I mean, I know it's the right way. We'll leave it at that. But then what do you do with those feelings? And it's people leave the toothpaste cap off. Does that happen in your family? And the toothpaste comes out in this little squiggly line because it's all dried around the, and then you squeeze it from the tongue. So that stuff makes you mad. Now those are dumb examples, but there's a lot of things that happen in relationships that will make us mad. And Virginia Satir says that the biggest reason relationships don't survive is our inability to accept differences in other people. I don't quite buy that. I think that it's our inability to fight about the differences that are in other people. And that what we do is we get mad, but we can't fight about it, and so the anger festers the relationship. It festers and kills the caring. The opposite of love, as far as I'm concerned, is not hate. It's not anger, it's not rage. The opposite of love is apathy. And apathy is what occurs when you've repressed the anger enough where it festers the care, and you no longer really have relationship. So it seems to me that if we took a group of kids and we sat them down and said, talked about anger a little bit and the things that make them angry, and that fighting is important in relationships, and you can learn to fight. And there's certain rules for this fighting. So we give them a list of rules, like rule number 1, maybe you always make I statements. And of course, that's basic communication stuff too. And I don't know if anybody in here have adolescents? You own an adolescent? That's a kid somewhere between the ages of 12 and 25, I think, not a car or anything. Well, adolescence is, it's tough to parent adolescents. There's no question about it. One recommendation I had from a good friend who was in this field was that you bury them at 13 and go check on them every few years, but really don't dig them up until they're about 22. Now, I'm not really recommending that. Okay? I mean, you don't know how much this stuff gets taken seriously. Anyway, adolescence is a time where there's resistance. Part of adolescence is that an adolescent struggles to break control. That's their job. The job of adolescence is to break parents' control over the adolescent. Because if like an adolescent allows a parent to control the adolescent constantly, it's like, a person being put in prison. If you were in prison for the first 18 years of your life, right? Then all of a sudden they open the gates, they give you the kick, and you're on your own. And say, well, enjoy life. You're not, what's going to happen to you? 5 minutes into your life, you're going to get run over by a truck, not knowing about streets and trucks, and you can't make decisions. You get totally dysfunctional. Adolescence is where you learn to make more of those decisions and to parent yourself. So co-parenting is the key of adolescence. But they did a study of adolescence. You know what they found out? That adolescents can only hear one thing at a time. And so if you're giving an adolescent instructions, and you say, hey, I'm leaving. I want you to pick up the yard, put your stuff away in the refrigerator and get your homework done. Then you come back and guess what? 80% of all adolescents will forget all 3 things. They've discovered that. Now, if you say 2 things, 50% of adolescents forget the 2 things. And if you say 1 thing, 80% of all adolescents remember the 1 thing. And the moral of that is that only 20% of adolescents are really hopeless, which isn't bad. Back to fight. You fight about 1 thing at a time because people can't deal with more than 1 thing at a time. Now, some people scream, and yell at each other all the time, And for some people, that's how they get close. They can have this little honeymoon. Some people, the only way they can have sex is to get in a fight and then have sex. For other people, it's like, the screaming and yelling is just a part of the constancy of the relationship. I'm not talking about that. But sometimes you got to scream and yell right down to your toes about what you're mad at. And the real healing in the relationships don't change. I found a wonderful therapist. In fact, maybe she would rather I didn't give her name, but you should get flooded with the calls all again. But I did a workshop with her, and we were on our way back from the workshop, and this place was really sexist. I mean, she would say something, and then people after the workshop would say, "Oh, I really liked it when you said that," and they'd say it to me. And so, I mean, it was just awful. It was a bad experience for her. And she got in the car, and she was just livid. And what she did was she started talking about it, and then she started yelling about it, and then she just started screaming about, like, this is 5,000 years of this kind of shit, and I'm so angry, and I just got to get it out, and she was really angry. And now, I think that cemented our relationship. It's like she said afterwards that was the first time she ever let her rage out about what's happened to her in her life and what happens to women, and especially with a man. And it's the only man that's ever stayed and heard it. And I know that we're kind of friends for life, partly because of that. But I never bothered to mention that, when you're driving 55, 65 miles an hour down a freeway and someone's screaming, you got nowhere to go. I couldn't have left if I wanted to. I had no choice but to hear it. But I've never told her that. She has this image that I chose to stay in there, and I did. But the key part is that we do clear out, and that sometimes and obviously, when you're yelling at someone, there was one rule in a communication that always take everything said in a fight seriously. That's horrible. I mean, sometimes you might call someone or tell them to do something to themselves that you really don't think they can do or would want to do. That you don't want them to do that to themselves. Or sorry about that, but. And so that's not to be taken seriously. In a fight, sometimes you just got to get it out and say it in a way, and sometimes you call a person name, and sure, that's about being, or where they're supposed to go, but it's not really that you want that to happen. It's just clearing the stuff out of a fight. So remember that the opposite of love is apathy. That fighting is a part of relationship, and we can fight with people that we deeply love, and I think sometimes it clears. I didn't talk about how feelings get repressed, and sometimes they get repressed so much and so often that they become a part of our fabric. They become internalized feelings. And sometimes you get around people and you just know that it's a part of their fabric, and anger is like that too. Some people have so much anger repressed, and they're so angry that you can't, that's the wall you bump into. Remember I said about pain, you got this wall around you, you can only get so close. But see, that's you only getting so close. With anger, when anger's the wall, it's them that bounce up against the anger wall. And they won't let themselves get too close. It's too scary to get close to someone that's that angry. And the angry person doesn't know it. When it's a part of your fabric, it's something you live with all the time, you don't even know you're angry. And you say, I'm not angry, as you're slugging someone. But you can't get close to someone who has that internalized anger until they start to own it, until they start to direct it at where it came from. The key part of anger is that it usually comes back someplace, somewhere in our past that have been, ways we've been hurt and haven't been able to stand up for that. And we carry it around and we pass it on. In fact, that's a lot of this stuff. A lot of what I'm talking about is that we take what happens to us, we have our feelings about it, and we pass it forward instead of backwards. We give to our present families and our kids what was given to us instead of giving it back to where it belongs. In fact, I'm going to even talk a little bit about how I think we've got a national parent protection racket going on in our country. And that I'm not into a blame system. In fact, I'm even going to talk about a forgiveness process. That everything I'm talking about is a forgiveness process. Everything. All of this is. It's a part of it. Because it's breaking denial. And you cannot forgive what you deny. That's impossible. So this is the beginning of a forgiveness process, to look at the feelings and look at what happened. All right, now, yes?
That last rule concerns me, and it's real fresh to me.
Which one?
About being present.
Oh, hanging in there?
Yeah. I find myself, when I get really angry, I will judge the situation as being potentially dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell when I'm about to go over the edge and get into behaviors, maybe act out behaviors that I feel like acting.
Mm-hmm. Like you might get out of control.
Right. Then I can't help but feeling at those times that the appropriate thing to do is to shut down.
Okay, so there is a fear that some of us have that when we get so angry, we'll get out of control and hurt someone. And when I say hang in there, I'm not saying hang in there even if you know you're going to hurt someone. And I'm not saying hang in there if you're being abused physically or battered emotionally and it's part of a process, you know, in your life and a part of that relationship. No, don't hang in there then. Get out. Get safe. That's a key. Or you get out so other people can be safe, but let them know why you're doing that in a way that doesn't threaten them and makes it about you and your problem rather than about what they're doing, which is awfully hard to do. Or at least explain it later why you left. But most of that getting out of control is mythology. I mean, I've worked with battering a lot. You know, and people that batter and hit and get so mad that they hit someone, they aren't out of control. I mean, they in fact, you know, they use the battering as much to control the other person's behavior. They use it as a function of controlling other people. And they aren't out of control because they have their limitations. They won't hit in the face, they won't use knives, you know, they won't hit in certain parts of the body, you know, they won't hit themselves, you know, things like that. You know, see, there's all kinds of control in it. And I believe that batterers have to accept how much in control and how much they use their battering to control. And I'm not saying you're a batterer, but I mean, we do have more control. But we do have more control than we think. And we get grandiose with our anger, thinking, oh, if I get angry, boy, this building's going to fly around and, you know, bodies are going to be streaming all over the countryside and Phoenix is going to be declared a national disaster area, you know, because of that's grandiosity. And that's a defense. That's a defense so we never have to deal responsibly with our anger. Just like, you know, if I get sad, I'll flood out Arizona, you know, and, you know, wash everybody out in the, you know, I'll never stop crying if I get sad. That grandiosity stuff gets in our way sometimes. And a lot of us go from that grandiosity to totally minimizing and saying, I'm not angry at all. And we switch, and we don't take the responsibility and the risk, you know, that gives us a chance to deal with these feelings because of that grandiosity or minimizing kind of a swing. I even had a couple guys in group once. You know, one was from the Chicago North Side, real poor area. Another was from a New York ghetto. And, I mean, they got in this Henny Youngman routine with each other about how poor they were so no one could understand them. You know, I'm so poor that, you know, I'm so poor that. And they couldn't do anything because of the grandiosity that they couldn't be understood. You know, it's a little different issue, but grandiosity in general, you know, we do generally have control over our feelings. Some of us don't. Some of us have a rage system and we lack impulse control. It's really the impulse, you know, not the feeling that's the problem though. And the impulse to hit. See, hitting isn't about anger. Hitting is about offender system, it's about violence, about things that were done to us that we're passing on to others, and it's about an effort to control or shut down someone else. So, I don't know, that's a long answer to a short question, but is that helpful at all? No.
No, in practice, I've ended up doing the same list with a lot of different groups myself, and like, find myself once in the situation, and that flashpoint's coming up, I feel like I'm invalidating the rule list. I'm wondering if it is in fact not working.
If it doesn't work for you now because of that flashpoint, then I say pull back at the flashpoint and then go back in when you know that it feels better to you. As far as the flashpoint goes, I think that we all have, like, some of our flashpoints are about rage. Some of us is about we have these shame attacks where you feel so bad about yourself, so horrible. Like if I have one right now, I'll stop talking, my face will get red, and I'll want to disappear. In fact, as I'm talking about it, I can feel one coming on, so I'm going to go real fast. So anyway, you know, or we get anxiety attacks about fear. You know, we all have attacks. I believe that as we embrace our feelings, start talking about our feelings and what happens to us, those attacks lessen. And they become have much less control of our life. So what I'm really saying is, want to buy a clinic? No, actually, want to buy a treatment program? What I'm really saying is that, you know, we can go through therapeutic processes that get us to the core of that stuff so that we can stay in and follow the rules of fighting, you know, in the staying in. But the rules of fighting don't say stay in if you're going to abuse someone or you're going to be scared that you're going to. That's not worth it.
Well, the only useful thing that came out of it is that if at that time at the flashpoint I state that that's what's going on, at least it keeps the door open to continue the discussion at a later time.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the only good thing that's come out of it. But feelings, inadequacy are real strong.
Yeah. I noticed that most men that have that flashpoint where they get so angry that they want to do something, what it comes primarily from is their fear of inadequacy and their feelings of responsibility and their fear in general. And that, men in our society are supposed to be so adequate and always in charge and always in control. And so then when we control so much that when we get out of control, it very often looks pretty crazy and feels real scary. And I think that you got to go in steps. But the steps are to look primarily at what happened to us that caused these feelings that churn up when someone's just saying something normal or we're in this normal fight and all of a sudden we want to kill them, or do something really, horrible to them. And incidentally, that's a normal part of anger too sometimes, just feeling angry enough to hit someone, and it doesn't mean that anybody is going to. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you get angry enough to do some physical harm. That's just a part of anger, and that our images of how we might, fulfill that. But the expression of the anger verbally, the fighting and the listening is usually enough. But if not, it's a therapeutic issue that we're looking at.
I've heard and read anger is not really a primary emotion, that it's a screen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. I know there's different ways of looking at this. Someone asked about primary emotion, whether anger really is a primary emotion. I do less and less talking about whether a feeling is primary or secondary. It's like shame is secondary because it always seems to come from someone else and their shame. But sure, it becomes primary in what it does to our life and how we feel about it. I think that in a real sense, all of our feelings are primary, but some of them come about from secondary causes. And I don't think anger is always a screen. I think some people, in fact, use hurt as their screen, and they're always acting like they're hurt when they're really mad. In fact, one analogy is like it's a coin. And it gets flipped up, and then it falls. And for some of us, it always seems to fall on hurt. And we're always really feeling hurt and sad and crying when we really need to be mad and standing up for ourselves. Other people are always mad and they never show that hurt part. And I think what's important is that we have both in whatever order. And maybe one isn't there without, maybe they're not always there together. But the key is, if they are, to allow yourself to turn both over and show both sides. So I don't do too much about whether one is primary or one is secondary. I don't do anything about whether one is positive and one is negative. I think what we do with our feelings is positive or negative, but not the feelings themselves. I'm also not like let all your feelings hang out kind of person. I think that there is some discretion, and like you don't talk about your pain in the supermarket line, and or you might, especially when you get your grocery bills. They're pain. I want to talk about fear because that's such a scary one. Well, actually, I'm having a touch of that today. In fact, when I used to give, when I first started lecturing, I had the runs for 2 days before the lecture. Now, always, fortunately, the runs stopped just before the lecture. I would have never been able to continue lecturing, But, I was actually saved. I was saved by the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. Not too many people were, 7 puppies and myself. But the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, it was a reprint from the, United Pressing. They wrote an article about how fear is the fear of public speaking is the most common fear that people have. And I read that, and I didn't feel so crazy, and immediately the fear of public speaking did lessen. Because what did I do? When I'd say, hey, I'm really scared about this talk, what do you think people would say to me? Don't be afraid. Nothing to be afraid of. Talk about feeling denial. And these are people that are doing workshops with me about feelings. They say, you don't have anything to be afraid of. Here I am sweating, perspiring, and I got to go to the bathroom again. And I knew that I was afraid. If I don't have anything to be afraid of and I'm still afraid, I must be crazy. Or I had the flu. Okay. The thing that we get from our anger is our strength. The thing that we get from our joy is our healing. Our sadness gives us empathy and vulnerability and intimacy. Our fear gives us wisdom. When we embrace our fear, when we understand our fear and accept it and let it work in our life, we get wisdom. We get the wisdom to lead the kind of life that we want to lead. Now, there's a couple alternatives to that. One, I call my Evel Knievel approach. Now, I don't know if there's any friends of evil in here. No, I mean friends of evil Knievel. I don't know if there's any friends of evil in here either, but I'd like to know if you are. But now I'm going to do. I mean, there's some things I really like about Evel Knievel. I mean, but I don't think he has a wise lifestyle. I think it's dumb. Now there's some parts of it that are pretty smart. Like Evel Knievel can start his motorcycle, right? Which is, I've got 3 motorcycles. I haven't been able to start one of them for 7 years. I mean, none of them for 7 years. See, now he'd say, that's dumb, and I'd have to listen then, I'd agree. But Evel Knievel gets his motorcycle started, and I'm jealous as all get out, and he can get it out of the garage, and he even can get over to Caesar's Palace. Now, in front of Caesar's Palace, they have 23 buses lined up, right? Vroom, vroom. Evel Knievel takes off, on his ramp, and he jumps over those buses. That's amazing. I know I couldn't do that, especially with a motorcycle that doesn't run. But I know I couldn't do it if it ran. And I think that's wonderful. And he gets a lot of money for that. Smart. But he made that last bus by 6 inches, right? Anybody ever see him do that? Okay, what does he do next? He adds a bus. You ever see a 6-inch bus? That's where I think evil's wisdom breaks down. Okay? And then all of a sudden, it's crash, and you get 142 broken bones in your body, and who knows, what drugs you need to take to medicate the pain, and you try and talk your son out of being a daredevil with no success. That's not a wise lifestyle, is it? There's an oil stock in southwestern Minnesota, and geologists were all saying, there's no oil in southwestern Minnesota. Well, one said that a 57 Chevy blew an engine, and there's a little bit on the highway from that some years back. But that's all the oil there was down there, and I know 2 guys that got wiped out. This is a courageous investment we're going to make. Mortgage our house, our kids, the whole thing. And they've invested, and they got wiped out. Does that show, that's stupid. That shows no sense of fear about getting wiped out. And people do that, make fortunes and lose fortunes, they get wiped out. Great, they have a lot of courage, they got a lot of stupidity to go along with it, or if they would have made a fortune, they would have kept the fortune. Now, sometimes it's not about stupidity. Sometimes, circumstances, the depression, alcoholism, a lot of things can get in the way. But generally, it comes from that always being on the edge, always taking risks, and sometimes excessive risks, and having an affair with the neighbor. I mean, dumb, right? There's no wisdom in that. That's a dumb person to have an affair with. You ever borrow a cup of raisins, and what does that do? That risks your family life, your position, community, your kids' relationship and the school stuff, and you end up moving. It's just horrible, horribly stupid stuff that we do. And why do we do it? Well, it's like we're acting out of fear, but denying that it's about fear, so we don't listen to the fear. Another example is, like all of a sudden I'm up here, and there's this 5,000-foot chasm, right? Anybody ever get to the top of a high place and have kind of this immediate urge to jump? Anybody besides me? A few of you. Okay, yeah. So you get at this 5,000-foot chasm, and you think, wow, it looks like fun. Zoom. No, we don't do that. What happens to us? Well, first of all, we think, oh yeah, rush of fear. 32 feet per second increased velocity, splat, right? I know, fortunately, there'd be something at the bottom to break your fall. Or the one, at halfway point, you say, so far, so good, or, no, you don't want jump jokes. Okay, the fact is that, I won't tell anything, I promise. The fact is that we're up here, and if we don't have the fear, we're not going to reflect on what the jump is going to do, and we're going to go over. The fear helps us say, dumb to jump, not what I'm going to do. However, it's an exaggeration maybe, but some of us live our lives like we don't have any fear. And we do. I played rugby for 17 years. Yeah, dumb. The first 3 years, not so dumb. I was 26, 27 years old. The body can take it. At 40, dumb. And I was chasing 19-year-old kids that were bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter than I was around the field, hoping to catch them. Actually, I was hoping I wouldn't catch them. And when I had the ball, I tried to immediately give it to someone else so no one would catch me. But the thing is, I go out in the field and people look at me, and I'd look back and I'd say, I may be small, but I'm slow. There was no reason for me at 40 to be out there, except, well, there are a couple actually reasons for me. One is that I had lots of fear that I grew up with, and I didn't know I had all this fear. But guess when I got to feel my fear and then didn't feel so crazy? Before a rugby match and during a rugby match. Actually, during, you forget about it. But there's always this fear beforehand. I was recycling. I was having an event where my fear could attach to. I was also reenacting the family violence on a weekend basis. Because there were always fights and anger and colliding and blood and all this stuff, kind of stuff I live with. So, but so much of it was just about the fear, that I was reenacting that fear and taking risks. Finally, someone came up and says, at your age, it's probably not a good idea playing rugby. In fact, what happens is that your injuries become disabilities. Well, I remember, I think it was a Bob Newhart thing, and his least favorite word in the whole world was maimed. Boy, immediately that whole skit flashed through my head, and I said, I think you're right. And I quit playing rugby, and I have 3 extra days a week that I can walk. I mean, it's amazing. That's a big thing, to be able to walk another 3 days a week and, work and be productive and be with family.